Hi folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse, where we take a look at movies, music, art, and culture. And this week we're going to be taking a look at the new hit album from acclaimed R&B artist Robin Thicke. Now for those of you who haven't been following the charts at all this year, let me provide a little bit of commentary discussing the rather bizarre trends sprouting up on the Billboard Hot 100. While the year started off fairly slow, a new trend began to coalesce as the summer began, a trend spurred by the release of a critically acclaimed album courtesy of one of the best groups in the country, an album that I've actually already reviewed, although not in video form. The song was Get Lucky. The band was Daft Punk. The album was Random Access Memories, and the music was a blend of funk and disco, two genres that many people considered dead at the end of the 70s, and yet here they were, making a comeback unlike anything we'd seen in a long time. And while I've been saying the 70s have been making a comeback since earlier this year, it was nice to see the charts reflect some of that. And really, the stylistic flourishes that represented that decade were popping up all over the charts, from the chanting and righteous cause bombast from Macklemore to the slick R&B touches with Justin Timberlake. Hell, Snoop Lion dropped an album that was basically an attempt of resurrecting politically charged reggae. And with the exception of When I Was Your Man, both of Bruno Mars' charting singles were basically 70s throwbacks, and they were easily on par with the best of his material. But really, the song that had to rise to the top was Get Lucky. Not only was it a scintillating and enthralling blend of disco and funk modernized, it had a real playful elegance in the lyrics that vaulted it above the average disco track. In my mind, it is still in hot contention for my list of the best songs of the year, and it might just rise to the top. Unfortunately, it's been blocked from that number one slot by another pseudo-disco track that apparently jumped out from out of nowhere, also starring Pharrell, a song that very quickly drew in some controversy for some rather overtly sexual lyrics. And it's this song, the title track from the album we're going to be talking about today, that has blocked Daft Punk for over 7 weeks. And it's courtesy of an artist who I thought went out of business a good 6 years ago. So let's talk about this guy, shall we? Robin Thicke is an artist you're all forgiven for forgetting, because outside of one single that Glee did infinitely better, he honestly hasn't done much that immediately jumped to memory, at least to me. Now granted, I give him a bit more credit going back through his discography, but I've never been able to like his music all that much, and after listening through his albums, I think I know why. For starters, unlike many R&B crooners, Robin Thicke does have a fair amount of vocal personality, and his falsetto range is incredibly expressive. And I'll give him this, when he wants to make a song that sounds incredibly sexual, he has the slick sophistication and class to make it work. Chris Brown should take notes. However, there is something about his delivery that just doesn't quite click with me. Namely that I never quite buy that he's entirely emotionally invested in his material. In comparison to, let's say, Usher, who throws everything in the kitchen sink into his love songs, Robin Thicke is a little bit more laid back, and that kind of puts me off a bit. On top of that, like too often his lyrics can be a little too jokey and silly, and while there's a certain degree of self-awareness, it can sometimes undercut or confuse the emotional current of the song. Now, granted, I'll admit right now that R&B isn't my strong suits when it comes to genre. It's not that I can't recognize good R&B, but more that I have a much smaller tolerance for it in comparison to, let's say, country music. Most of this comes from the lyrics, and that too often the subject matter behind them seems to be a little thin, or the lyrics feel underwritten. But then again, that might be an area where Robin Thicke's goofier side might be an asset. He might not be able to make an incredibly intelligent or deeply moving R&B album, but I bet he could still make an interesting one. So, how does this new album Blurred Lines fare? Well, pretty much exactly as I expected. I wouldn't precisely call Blurred Lines a bad album. It's tolerable enough and it doesn't really offend. But all the faults that I expected with his material haven't precisely gone away. For a change, let's switch things up a bit and talk about the lyrics and theme first, arguably because they're the least essential parts of this album. On first listen, it's immediately clear that Robin Thicke is more of a singles artist. The flow from track to track on Blurred Lines can be considered staccato at best, but his lyrics retain a surprising amount of personality and definitely stick out. Then again, I'm not quite sure that's a good thing, mostly because they stand out by being more than a little ridiculous at points. While I will give Thicke points for lyrical personality, oftentimes I will have to immediately subtract them for some forced rhymes and some truly bizarre punchlines that can't help but raise your eyebrows with disbelief. Take For the Rest of My Life, which starts off as a fairly basic song about him attempting a relationship with someone and constantly striking out until she calls him up one night. And to get there to consummate that relationship, Thicke stole my daddy's car. Now, I get it that he's supposed to be younger in the song, but the usage of the word stole just inserts a different connotation than if he used the words took or borrowed. And that kind of undercut the emotions of the song for me. It started to look less romantic, it started to look a little bit more like a felony. And that's not even talking about the songs in the album that are just real odd. For example, Ain't No Hat for That is a strange little track where Thicke talks about a friend of his wife that wants to host a party and co-spy on some of their fame. And now for a party like this, there ain't no hat for that. And sure, while I get the metaphor, there's no real way to dress up for a party where you're just being exploited for fame, Thicke uses parts of this earlier verse saying that his wife did indeed have the right shoes. So the song feels a little bit too literal. And while Blurred Lines has risen to the top of the charts, most people tend to forget how utterly bizarre the lyrics are. Playing with the Madonna horror complex I haven't seen in a pop song since Akon's Sexy Bitch. Now granted, Blurred Lines does it better, drawing the implication that the good girl is wild and likes sex and won't be domesticated. But then there are lyrics like, I know you want it, and just let me liberate you, and do it like it hurt, come across as more than a little questionable. And while I think that this song isn't as rapey as some have implied, T.I.'s verse about rough sex really doesn't help matters. And admittedly, some of the oddness of this album does make ascertaining a theme rather difficult. From what I've read before recording this album, Robin Thicke and his wife started going out again with friends, and also discovered that the older he felt, the more he realized things weren't as black and white as he expected, hence the album title. And really, if we're looking for an album that alternates as a celebration of how great Robin Thicke's life is right now and how much he wants to party and have fun, Blurred Lines is a fine enough specimen. Now, I can imagine some of you are asking how on earth this sort of self-congratulatory music can be remotely tolerable. And here's where I'm going to mention the one reason why it works here better than, let's say, on Jay-Z's Magna Carta Holy Grail. And here it is. Robin Thicke has a sense of humor and self-deprecation, and he really doesn't brag all that much about himself or his possessions. Let's go back to Blurred Lines for a moment. Now, there's a lot going on in that song, but I can definitely see why, on the surface of it, it looks a bit like a douche anthem with lines like, you're the hottest bitch in this place, and you wanna hug me, what rhymes with hug me? But the tone of the song doesn't really convey arrogance or swaggering self-satisfaction. Between Pharrell's general dopiness, T.I.'s class, and Thicke's self-deprecation, I can't help but feel that the song is too ridiculous and silly to be all that offensive. Or take the closing track, The Good Life. It's clear in the song that Thicke really hasn't attained the level of fame or success or ridiculous wealth that his friends and family have expected him to, but yet he's happy, living the good life with his family. It's really the tone of the song and Thicke's delivery that sells it for me here. He sounds genuinely grateful for the fact that he made it, and the fact that he knows he's never going to top the A-list makes him all the more sympathetic. For someone who's trying to be Justin Timberlake as hard as he is, there's none of that enormous ego that really put me off Timberlake's 2020 experience. Now, I haven't talked much about Thicke's delivery, and there's a reason for that. I pretty much have nothing but praise for it. Seriously, it's everything I expected from Robin Thicke, and for once, the more laid-back tone of the album does match his delivery. The falsetto is gorgeous as usual, but I actually quite like his lower range. It's assured and confident and has a fair amount of charisma. And like Justin Timberlake, he's probably capable of carrying an album all on his own. Which is why his collaborations with 2 Chainz and Kendrick Lamar are easily the weakest tracks on the album. Mostly because 2 Chainz is too obnoxious and Kendrick Lamar just has no charisma or presence here besides being nasal and grating. Now, of course, the reason that Give It To You and Go Stupid With You are the weakest tracks aren't just because of the guest stars. No, this problem comes straight from the instrumentation and production, where this album arguably has its biggest problems. Oh, don't get me wrong, the production is top of the line across the board, but there's a marked gulf in quality between these particular tracks, which are basic club dance tracks, complete with the electronic beat and thumping bass, and the rest, which are these blissed out retro disco tracks. In fact, the majority of the album feels like a 70s throwback, and why it doesn't quite have the funkiness or the edge to match Daft Punk's masterpiece, it definitely still manages to work, and it's a damn perfect fit for Robin Thicke here. It's also one of the reasons why I like The Good Life so much. It sounds very much like an old Elton John song in the best possible way. But here's where the problem is. Disco dance albums are all about flow. They had their ebbs and moments where the pace quickened or slowed, but they could be played all the way through and maintain a consistent tone. And the addition of modern club tracks interspersed throughout the album completely ruins that flow. What's worse is that it actively forces the comparison between said club tracks and the rest. And they can't help but fall painfully flat, only reinforcing the fact that I'd much rather be dancing to disco than generic club crap. And the really unfortunate problem is that the comparison doesn't quite make the disco elements of the album look better, but the club tracks look all the worse. And yet, all in all, I still enjoyed the hell out of Blurred Lines. Now, look, it's far from perfect, and it probably won't come anywhere near close to reaching any list of top 10 albums of the year. But in terms of being a sunny summer album, it has a certain flair and enduring charm that I actually like. In not trying to be taken seriously, Robin Thicke actually succeeds here, which isn't something I'd say about most artists. And as for instrumentation, I'm reminded a bit of Bruno Mars, which only seems to make the good music when it calls back to the past. Mr. Thicke, Robin, there's nothing wrong with calling back to the 70s. And if the charts this year have proven anything, it's that. Just step up and own it, and you'll be just fine. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'm going to be putting out more videos coming up pretty soon. Coming up next will be a Backstreet Boys video. Yeah, that one. I'll see you next time.